China, first row. China, 67%. That's tariff.
But what exactly are rare earth elements?
What if the future of the United States hinged on a metal you have never heard of? While politicians argue on TV and markets twitch over inflation, China just made a move that could quietly dismantle America's economic power from the inside out. It involves seawater, a strange mineral called rubidium, and a level of control that no missile or microchip can match. You are not ready for this story. The elemental trap America walked into. Rubidium might sound like something out of a science fiction movie, but in today's global economy, it is more important than oil, gas, or even gold. While most Americans have never heard of it, China just became the first country in history to extract rubidium directly from seawater. That single act may have changed the entire balance of global power, because this rare metal is not just rare, it is essential. Without it, satellites stop working, military sensors shut down, quantum computers cannot function. And the worst part? The United States does not even have the infrastructure to produce it independently, let alone at scale. For decades, American policymakers ignored the slow buildup happening across the Pacific. While Washington focused on steel tariffs and trade deficits, Beijing was building a monopoly, not just on rubidium, but on nearly all rare earth elements. These minerals are the silent foundation of every modern technology. You will find them in smartphones, electric vehicles, solar panels, guided missile systems, medical imaging machines, and even the very wind turbines meant to save us from climate change. Strip away the buzzwords, and everything high-tech boils down to magnets, sensors, and conductivity. And China owns the raw materials behind them all. What most people do not realize is how long this trap has been quietly closing. In the early 2000s, rare earth metals were just another niche commodity. Mining them was messy, expensive, and politically complicated. The United States outsourced it to cut costs. China, on the other hand, subsidized it. Beijing absorbed the environmental costs and undercut global prices so ruthlessly that nearly every competitor folded. That included the Mountain Pass mine in California, once the largest rare earth producer in the world. It shut down in 2002. By the time it reopened years later, it had to ship its raw output to China for processing because the United States no longer had the capacity to do it on its own. Now, with rubidium added to China's list of capabilities, the monopoly tightens. And this is no conspiracy theory. Even the Pentagon has admitted it. America's defense systems rely on magnets made with Chinese materials. Fighter jets, naval radar, drone guidance, every piece of the military supply chain is built on the assumption that Chinese exports will keep flowing. But what happens when they do not? That moment may already be here. Earlier this year, China imposed sweeping new restrictions on the export of key rare earth elements, citing national security concerns. In reality, it was a quiet geopolitical warning. Stop pushing. Do not escalate. And if the message was unclear, Beijing followed it by pausing shipments entirely. The White House scrambled. Emergency meetings were held. Industry insiders went into full-blown panic. The United States could barely maintain production on vital defense contracts, let alone civilian applications. And it gets worse. Even when America extracts its own rare earths, it lacks the industrial capacity to refine them into usable components. That entire phase of the supply chain, crushing, separating, purifying, is dominated by China. The United States has zero functional alternatives at scale, which means every mine reopened in Montana or California is still just feeding raw material back to Beijing's factories. So where does that leave American industry? On the edge. Automakers are already feeling it. Ford has been forced to shut down some production lines temporarily. General Motors is issuing quiet warnings to suppliers, and it is not just electric vehicles at risk. From steering systems to braking units, even traditional cars rely on rare earths to function. And the cracks are showing. The ripple effect spreads fast. When car production slows, steel demand drops, logistics suffer, suppliers tighten, and the cascading slowdown can reach every corner of the economy. But while Wall Street watches interest rates, the real collapse might be quietly brewing in a Chinese customs office halfway across the world. Can the United States escape this elemental chokehold, or is it already too late? How China weaponized seawater and turned minerals into ammunition. When China announced that it had successfully extracted rubidium from seawater, most media outlets skipped over the headline. After all, it sounded like obscure chemistry. But inside the Pentagon, the reaction was immediate. Officials knew what this breakthrough meant. It was not just about one mineral, it was about a new method of securing the future. China had taken the most abundant resource on the planet, ocean water, and turned it into a mining field. One with no borders, no regulations, and no competition. It was the beginning of a new kind of dominance. Extracting minerals from seawater is not new in theory, but doing it economically and at scale is something no country had achieved until now. The process involves filtering vast amounts of salt water through membranes that selectively capture trace metals. Most nations abandoned the idea because the energy costs were too high. But China found a way. With a combination of advanced nanofiltration techniques and cheap renewable energy, it cracked the code. This is not just scientific innovation, it is geopolitical leverage at its purest. The moment rubidium was extracted from seawater, China became the only nation capable of producing a steady, renewable supply of one of the most sought-after strategic metals in existence. Rubidium plays a crucial role in quantum computing, GPS systems, and high-precision sensors. Without it, the very concept of next-generation technology falls apart. And unlike lithium or cobalt, rubidium has almost no replacement. Once it is cut off, you cannot pivot to a substitute. The market simply freezes. And that is exactly the position the United States finds itself in. While Congress debates tax reform and presidential candidates argue about foreign policy, the real war is being fought in mineral labs. And so far, China is winning every round. Not just with rubidium, but with other critical minerals too. Neodymium for magnets, dysprosium for high-temperature resistance, terbium for lighting and displays. All of them flow through Chinese refineries before they appear inside American-made products. That is the part most consumers miss. Even if a device is designed in Silicon Valley and assembled in Texas, it cannot function unless the raw elements come through Chinese hands. Without these minerals, there are no smartphones, no electric vehicles, no solar panels, and more importantly, no military superiority. The rare earth supply chain has become the economic equivalent of a central nervous system, and China holds the spinal cord. While America focused on short-term wins and quarterly profits, Beijing built an empire. Quietly, strategically, layer by layer. It invested in African mines, formed exclusive partnerships across Latin America, and funded deep-sea exploration programs years before any Western government paid attention. The result? A global web of supply lines that all point back to the same source. When the time came to apply pressure, China did not have to raise a single weapon. It simply paused a shipment. The silence that followed was deafening, and the fallout was immediate. Automakers in the United States began quietly requesting emergency licenses to import specific rare earth compounds. These licenses, valid only for a few months, came with no guarantees. They were desperate measures, not solutions. Meanwhile, tech companies scrambled to find alternative suppliers, only to discover that no other country could match the volume, purity, and speed of China's output. The European Union faced the same challenge. Even Germany, long known for its industrial might, was left waiting for bureaucratic clearance from Beijing. And here lies the brilliance of China's strategy. It does not need to dominate by force. It dominates through dependence. The moment it pauses exports, global supply chains tremble. Production lines halt, stocks plummet. And all of this can be done without firing a single shot. It is the 21st century version of economic warfare, and China holds all the ammunition. India and other Asian nations have started trying to break into the market. Talks with Central Asian states are underway. Plans are being drawn. Alliances are forming. But the reality remains. These are still just plans. China has spent decades building its rare earth infrastructure. It has trained experts, perfected processing techniques, and integrated the supply chain from mine to magnet. No competitor is even close. In many ways, rubidium extraction from seawater is just the tip of the iceberg. What it truly represents is a signal. China has now proven that it can innovate faster, invest deeper, and move more decisively than its rivals. It is no longer just the factory of the world. It is the refinery of the future. And now, as Western nations begin to realize what is at stake, can India, Australia, and the West build a rare earth alliance in time? As the world wakes up to the magnitude of China's rare earth dominance, the scramble to create a counterbalance has begun. But trying to catch up to a country that holds over 90% of global rare earth processing is like trying to build a dam during a flood. The United States, the European Union, India, and Australia all recognize the threat. The question is whether they can move fast enough to avoid being washed away by the consequences. India is emerging as one of the most determined players in this race. With demand for rare earths skyrocketing due to its growing space program, electric vehicle expansion, and increasing military manufacturing, India has realized that relying on China for strategic minerals is no longer viable. At the most recent India-Central Asia Dialogue, New Delhi unveiled an ambitious proposal, a cooperative exploration and development pact with 5 Central Asian nations: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. This alliance could reshape the mineral map of Eurasia. These countries possess untapped mineral deposits, many of which remain unexplored due to outdated infrastructure, limited industrial capacity, and lack of investment. India is offering to change that. It wants to send geologists, engineers, and capital to create a new corridor of resource development, one that bypasses China and gives emerging powers a seat at the global supply table. In return, India gains something more valuable than minerals. It gains time. But time alone is not enough. Mining is only the first step. What follows, refinement, purification, and manufacturing, is where the real value lies. India knows this. That is why its proposal includes plans for joint research centers, regional knowledge hubs, and even co-developed processing facilities on Central Asian soil. These ideas are bold, but they are also risky. Central Asia lacks a modern industrial ecosystem. Training workers, building labs, and creating new supply routes takes not months, but years, and time is a luxury the West may not have. While India builds partnerships, Australia is trying a more direct approach. Perth-based Lynas Rare Earths has already shaken up the industry by launching the world's first large-scale production of dysprosium oxide outside of China. At its Malaysian facility, Lynas is processing over 1,500 tons of material annually. A separate terbium line is set to open soon. For the first time in decades, a Western ally has demonstrated that China's monopoly is not unbreakable. This milestone is more than just a technical achievement, it is psychological. Western manufacturers now see a glimmer of hope. Governments, too, are responding. Australia has poured more than $1 billion Australian dollars into developing new processing centres like Iluka's Eneabba project. The goal is to move away from raw extraction and toward complete supply autonomy, from mining to magnets. However, none of this is simple. Refining heavy rare earths is an exact science. It requires high-temperature separation, radiation safety measures, and precision metallurgy, all skills that China has mastered over the past 2 decades. Western countries are still trying to relearn them, and even as Australia scales up, its capacity remains tiny compared to China's. The European Union is now involved as well, albeit cautiously. Germany has been the loudest voice, especially as automakers like Volkswagen and BMW begin feeling the sting of delayed shipments and rising costs. France and Italy are also exploring deals with Africa and Southeast Asia, though progress remains limited. The EU's main challenge is fragmentation. While China operates with centralized strategy and national coordination, Europe remains divided by competing interests and regulatory hurdles. The United States, for its part, is throwing money at the problem. The Biden administration, followed by bipartisan support in Congress, has pledged billions in subsidies for rare earth mining and processing. Companies like MP Materials and USA Rare Earth have been fast-tracked for federal contracts, but they remain in early stages. The Mountain Pass mine in California is producing material again, yet all of it still goes to China for processing. Until that bottleneck is addressed, the mine might as well be in Beijing. There is hope on the horizon. The Department of Defense is now funding research into domestic refining capabilities, pilot plants are being built, and private companies are racing to create magnetic production lines inside the United States. But this is a marathon, not a sprint. Estimates suggest that building a complete, self-sufficient rare earth supply chain in the US will take at least 5 to 7 years, and that is under ideal circumstances. In the meantime, pressure is building. Automakers are running out of alternatives. Aerospace firms are drafting contingency plans, and even tech giants like Apple and Tesla are starting to rethink their sourcing strategies. As more companies push for diversification, the hope is that demand itself will accelerate the development of alternative supply chains. But China is not standing still. It is tightening its grip, expanding into Africa, forming joint ventures with Southeast Asian nations, and pushing its influence deeper into every corner of the rare earth ecosystem. Beijing knows that its dominance is not just economic, it is strategic. Every delay, every export pause, every bureaucratic slow walk sends a message. This is our game. So can the rest of the world catch up? Can India's Central Asia plan bear fruit before another trade freeze? Will Australia's facilities scale fast enough to meet demand? Can the United States finally build what it abandoned decades ago? What happens if China pulls the plug for good? The possibility that China might permanently shut off the rare earth pipeline to the west has always hovered in the background like a dark cloud. But now that it has already restricted exports and delayed licenses with little warning, that once distant threat has become a very real scenario. If Beijing decides to fully weaponize its dominance, the global economy would not just take a hit, it could seize up entirely. In a matter of weeks, production lines across the United States would begin grinding to a halt. Automakers would be the first to feel the pain. Vehicles rely on rare earths, not just for electric motors, but for everything from infotainment systems to power steering. Even combustion engine cars are packed with rare earth-dependent parts. Once those supplies dry up, dealerships would be left empty, prices would spike, and consumer demand would plummet. Then it would move deeper. Aerospace firms rely heavily on neodymium and samarium cobalt magnets for jet engines and guidance systems. Companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin would be unable to maintain output. Missile systems, satellites, and drone platforms would be impacted almost immediately. The Pentagon's most advanced weapons would become inert metal shells waiting on components stuck in Chinese ports. Even sectors far removed from defense or automotive would feel the squeeze. Medical imaging machines, MRI scanners, precision optics for research labs, all would face parts shortages. Factories that have never thought about rare earths would suddenly find themselves unable to repair or replace critical equipment. And with limited domestic processing capacity in the US or EU, alternatives would not arrive fast enough. It is not just a supply chain problem, it is a national security crisis. Experts estimate that the United States has a stockpile of only 2 to 3 months' worth of rare earths. After that, every passing week would push companies and governments closer to shutdowns, layoffs, and even system-wide failures. Emergency imports might offer temporary relief, but the panic they would unleash would ripple through the global economy. China would not even need to make a formal announcement. A quiet slowdown, a few unprocessed shipments, an extended licensing delay, those would be enough to cause markets to wobble and investors to flee. Insurance companies would adjust premiums, logistics firms would reroute contracts, supply managers would raise red flags, all of it creating a chain reaction with no clear endpoint. So far, the only thing preventing that nightmare is the assumption that China would not dare to escalate this far. But that assumption is based on a belief in mutual economic interest, a belief that is quickly eroding. Beijing has already used rare earths to apply pressure in minor disputes. If tensions with Washington or Brussels were to flare again over Taiwan, the South China Sea, or tech sanctions, rare earths could become the first point of retaliation, and the West would have no immediate defense. The only long-term solution is diversification. India's exploration in Central Asia, Australia's expanding facilities, and the US drive for domestic refining are all part of the answer. But until those efforts mature, the world remains exposed, and China knows it. The global economy runs on materials most people have never heard of, but those metals, rubidium, neodymium, dysprosium, now hold the power to shift the balance of nations. China controls the mines, the refineries, the experts, and the methods. And if that control is ever used as a weapon, the fallout will be swift and brutal. The clock is ticking. America and its allies must act before the next pause becomes permanent. If you want more eye-opening breakdowns of the battles shaping our world's future, hit subscribe and stay tuned. Because this economic war is far from over, and the next move might already be happening behind the scenes.